Alrighty, everyone. I want to be respectful of everyone's time this evening. And so I'm going to get started here. Like I said, we might do a little bit of a slow start and go through some introductions before we launch into presentations, just to let some of the additional folks log in who may be getting their registration all squared away and logging in. My name is Derek Eisenbach. I am the Renewable Energy Program Lead for BLM Arizona. And I'll give a little bit more of an introduction about myself in a minute, but I do want to take a minute to talk about some of the other staff that are on with us today from BLM. And I will start with Amanda Dodson, our field manager.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Amanda Dodson, field manager for the Kingman field office, and thanks for taking time out of your evenings to hear this information about these variant solar projects, and looking forward to getting your feedback. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Amanda. And we have a number of other kind of principal staff here on the project. I listed them out. These may be folks that you work with if you regularly conduct business with BLM. So if you guys want to come off camera and give a quick wave, I'm just going to run down some names here, and then we'll go back and get this meeting started. So Maria Nicoletti is our lead realty specialist in the Kingman field office, and she's the one that handles processing of applications that come in, really doing a lot of that initial processing of that. Tim Watkins is our tribal liaison, and he coordinates consultation with sovereign tribal nations, and BLM is part of the requirements that we have under the National Historic Preservation Act and other acts governing that special relationship. Erica Stewart is based out of Yuma, but she covers the entirety of the Colorado River District as a project manager, particularly coordinating for renewable energy. Thanks, Erica, for that. Selena Martinez is our project manager. Works with me here in the Arizona State Office, works on renewable energy and major transmission line projects. We have Dolores Garcia, our public affairs specialist, who's helping coordinate out of the Arizona State Office and with a focus in the Colorado River District right now. So thanks, Dolores, for helping us with this meeting. And then there's me, the Renewable Energy Program Lead here out of the Arizona State Office, based up in Phoenix, but I work statewide. And I help process and manage really all the applications that come into BLM Arizona for various renewable energy, both wind and solar. We have, I think, statewide, we've received somewhere in the neighborhood of like about 30 or 35 applications that come in that we have received at this point, and they're all in sort of various places of processing. And we'll talk about some of that processing as we get into it today, some of the procedures in that. But I'm kind of there every step of the way, and I'll be the one facilitating this meeting tonight. So thanks again for joining us. I'm going to go back to my original slide here for a second, but before we go much further, I do want to lay out a couple of things about how this meeting might be structured. And I want to bring Erica on board first. We do have a website, and it's listed here, this e-planning website. And Erica will take us through what is on that website and how you can navigate to some of the information that that you may want to reference for any comments or questions that you want to share with us. So go ahead and take it away, Erica.
Let's see, Dolores, do I have sharing capabilities?
I believe you do.
Let's see here.
Because currently Derek is sharing, but you should have those as well.
Derek, can you go ahead and stop sharing, please? Great. Thank you. Okay, should be able to see my screen. So the first thing I just want to walk you through is I am using Microsoft Bing. You can use Google, and I put in e-planning here in the search engine. Is the easiest way to find the website. And this first one right here pops up, e-planning, Bureau of Land Management. And so from there, what we do is, oops, my apologies, click on that, and that brings you to the explore the NEPA register. And so from there, you click on this tab right here, and I recreated these earlier just so that way it doesn't take time to load. But right here in this search engine, what you're going to do is those first three projects that Derek had up earlier included Leo Solar, And then the other two projects that we're presenting today, Mineral Park. And so what you want to do is actually, which project did you want to look at? And so I'm going to use Leo Solar as an example. And I'm just going to hit this search tab right here. This is the easiest way to find this. You can use the drop downs, just gets kind of cumbersome. And right here at the very top is what we call the Colorado River District Solar Variances 2023. And so these three projects are currently in the variance process. And so that's why they're combined into this. So once we open this tab here, you're actually going to find this page. So it is combined with another variance project that we presented last week before with the Eagle Eye Solar project as well. So both of those are included in this page. Right here on the left-hand side under documents is where we're going to go. But real quick before I do that, I wanted to highlight on the right-hand side here, you have your points of contact. So these are additional email addresses here. If you lose the piece of paper that you're writing your notes on, you can have these here as well. And then, like I said, you want to go to the documents on the left-hand side. And here we have Leo Solar, White Hill Solar, phase 1 and 2, and our Mineral Park Solar. So under each one of these tabs, you'll have the KMZ files, so that way you can load it into your own mapping system. And then we have our variance factors analysis report, which includes both PDF maps and a description of the project. And then from here, let's see if we get one of these to load real quick. But each project has one of these reports. And you're welcome to read through each one of them, and they give you a good explanation of each of the project that the proponents are presenting today. And I believe we're actually working on getting some additional maps loaded up, and all of our material for now will go onto that website. And then if the projects move through the variance process, then additional websites will be established. We'll get those out to folks. But this is what that variance factors analysis looks like. And I'm going to just kind of scroll briefly just so you see it. This one is a number of pages here. So there are quite a bit of reading for each one, but you're more than welcome to read through them. And we appreciate all of your comments on each of these projects. Is there any questions on how to get there?
Thanks, Erica. That's great. And yeah, if you do have any questions or you're having trouble navigating or unable to get any documents to load, you can reach out to one of us and we will help you out. And going back, I'm going to share my screen again for just a second. And going back, there we go, to the main slide. This link here will take you directly to that page that Erica had up. So if you copy this website, I think what I'll ask is for Selena to put that over in the chat so you can copy that and bookmark it in your web browser. That would be great. And speaking of Selena, I am going to turn the floor over to Selena for just a second to talk about some of the rules that we have kind of put together to make sure we have an orderly meeting tonight. And she'll give us some pointers about how to navigate Zoom if you're unfamiliar with Zoom, and make sure that you can be a full participant in the meeting. So Selena, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Derek, and good evening, everyone. We will have 3 presentations this evening, each covering a unique project application. After each presentation, we'll open the floor for questions and answers. Please use this time to ask specific questions about how the applicant has considered land use, natural resources, or specific design elements in their concept thus far. We may also have questions about process, timelines, and other procedural matters. We want to ensure that all the presenters have time to speak. So if you could please hold your more general questions and comments until later, we will circle back at the end and cover those. At the conclusion of all the presentation is when the presentation is never open the floor to more general comments and questions about any proposal, whether you're supportive, not supportive, or you have specific suggestions that the applicants should consider at this time.
Selena?
Yes.
I hate to interrupt, but we did get a comment and it seems like your audio is a bit muffled.
Oh, okay. Let me try putting headphones. I'm sorry about that.
That has already improved. In fact, that switch that you just did right there.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that. So if you request, if you want to request a microphone, please raise your hand. And for those who are a little more unfamiliar with Zoom, there's a ribbon on the bottom of your screen with various buttons. If you notice, there's one that has a little smiley face with a plus on it. That is your reactions button. So if you click on that, you'll see there's a raise hand option, and that will allow us to see that your hand is raised. And I will be pointing participants in the order that their hand is raised when it's time to ask questions. We ask that you limit your question or comment to no more than 3 minutes so that everyone has time to speak. If you don't wish to come onto audio, you can enter your question or comment in the chat. And to do that, you'll find the chat button at the bottom ribbon, the same as next to the reactions button, 2 buttons over. And if you click on that, it should open a screen where you can go ahead and enter comments in the chat, see other comments in the chat. Let's see. Hopefully there are no issues with anybody accessing any of those buttons. If there are, please feel free to take yourself off mute and make sure that we get that addressed. All right, we will also be accepting written comments either via postal mail or email. BLM does understand that there may be a petition or letters being prepared from organizations. We welcome them all. All these concerns will be summarized in our final report on this variance process. All right, just a reminder that this is a public meeting and it is being recorded. If you don't wish to speak or comment on, put your camera on, we respect that. And we invite you to submit comments in writing. They will be part of the public record. We will also be posting this video recording publicly. So if any of your friends or neighbors were not able to log on tonight, they will still have an opportunity to watch it and submit comments or questions for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Selena. So let's get on with it. We're going to be talking about 3 proposals today: 1 Leo Solar, 1 Mineral Park Solar, and 1 White Hills Solar. And before we get to those, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we're in right now. So, and I will do my best to not give you guys a policy lecture because nobody wants to hear it, right? But like the fact of the matter is that we do have quite a bit of policy stuff that we have to adhere to. And I want to make sure that everyone is clear about where we are in terms of this policy stuff. So just like the home that you live in, BLM has land use plans. You know, the land use plan that you have to live in is says whether or not you can build an apartment on your lot or a single family home or a factory that produces something, right? And at BLM, we have something that's not as rigid as a city or county zoning plan, but it's a plan nonetheless that tells us what kind of management we should deploy onto the public lands that are in our trust. So back in 2012, actually, if we go back to like 2008, when they really started thinking about this, it was, could we use public lands for solar energy development? And the answer is yes, sure, it's BLM. You can use lots of things. We're a multiple use agency. However, solar development presents a kind of unique impact on BLM lands. It becomes a use that is a single use. And unlike an area of multiple use lands where people can recreate on it and we can conserve species and we can run a power line over the top of it or whatever it may be, land that can accommodate multiple uses. If solar authorization is permitted, it really sort of precludes other uses. And so BLM underwent a planning process that was called the Solar PEIS, which won't mean a whole lot to you, but you may hear that term once in a while. What makes a little bit more sense and rolls better off the tongue is the Western Solar Plan. And this was designed to amend all of our land use plans, our resource management plans, or RMPs, to accommodate solar. It did 3 things, and I highlighted these as kind of a stoplight here: red, yellow, and green. It created exclusion areas. These are areas under BLM land that is excluded from solar energy development, is prohibited out there. There's 32 different criteria. I won't talk through them all here, but let me just point out that these are some of the greatest sensitivities that BLM has on their lands, including special designations like wilderness, areas of critical environmental concern, areas of endangered species, critical habitat. There's a number of criteria under there, but they all kind of fall to the level of like very sensitive resource protection, natural resource protection. So these areas are off limits. If we were to consider a solar proposal in one of those areas, we'd have to go through a land use plan amendment, and that's a long and time consuming and really labor intensive process. And so it's something that we rarely approach. There's also the kind of yellow light areas. I'll talk about those in a second, but let me skip ahead to the green light areas. These are called solar energy zones, or SEZs, or SEZs that you might hear them called, as like an abbreviation. These were areas that were deemed to have the lowest resource conflict with the greatest potential to contribute to the nation's energy grid. So there was a screening process, a number were proposed. I think we had at some point 4 or 5 proposed in Arizona. They narrowed it down to 2 in the Western Solar Plan, and then subsequently designated a 3rd. Those are all filled up in Arizona. So we have projects essentially committed to those solar energy zones right now. One near the town of Arlington behind the Palo Verde generating station, one in the town of Brenda, and then one down near Dateland. So all those solar energy zones right now are under analysis to host renewable energy in there, solar energy in there. And then all the land that was left over, lots and lots of acres, are this yellow light area or solar variance areas. And it's really important that I kind of bring this up because it's the subject of the meeting today. These are areas that may be suitable, but they need to go and review the criteria before we proceed with them. Because our plans live a long time, like I said, this is going back to 2012, and here we are 11 years later, situations may have changed. What may have been, seen as okay, is permissible in 2012 may not be any longer. There may have been a discovery of a new listed species and critical habitat was like designated. There may be new sensitivities that emerge, or there may have been other land uses proposed in those areas. There could be a lot of things, but what I'm getting to is like, we review the criteria to see if there's any, what you might call showstoppers, if you will, that say like, whoa, this area should actually be in the red zone, but it wasn't designated back then, but upon further review, we need to slide it over to an exclusion area or something like that and prohibit this project from going forward. That may be a part of it. Another part of it is just to do some due diligence to say, well, it's hard to say no. It's not really a hard exclusion here, but there may be some issues that we want to like grapple with before we actually embark on analyzing this project in further details. So there may be some new research that's come out that we want to investigate pertaining to a sensitive bird species, or we need to grapple with Arizona native plant law or something like that. And so, we use this variance process to really develop, I guess, a report that will help inform us as we prepare and plan for these projects should they move forward. So that's what I kind of want to bring up out of there. And I'll revisit this a couple of times. We subsequently, after 2012, had a similar kind of planning effort that would refine some of the criteria just for Arizona. So one term you may hear tonight is REDA, R-E-D-A, or Renewable Energy Development Area. These are lands that are close to transmission in that they're either previously impaired. For example, they may have been a landfill or agriculture on there, or abandoned mine lands, or they may be potential for low resource conflicts. So these are areas that I guess you could say are kind of elevated a bit that we would like to try to steer renewable energy into there. But just because these were designated doesn't mean that we shortcut the renewable energy, the solar variance process. And a couple of things I want to leave you with before we launch into this. The solar variance process, there is no decision before BLM right now. And I want to make that very clear to everyone because I know that, like I said, policy is something that we don't really want to tune into, and it can get kind of twisted and misinterpreted sometime, but this is not a decision-making process, the solar variance thing. What we have are some project concepts, some very early ideas of like, we have a box out here that seems that would be fitting for a project and a kind of concept of what we might build there, but it does not have the detail that we would need before we embark on an authorization process. And this is really just kind of, like I said, a discussion of an early concept at the very earliest stage. The culmination of this variance process, including the meeting tonight, will be a report that goes on to BLM leadership for concurrence as to whether or not this concept fits with the broader land use planning objectives, which are both local for the Kingman Resource Management Plan, the Kingman RMP, but also these are public lands. And, you know, we look at things sometimes very locally, but BLM leadership weighs in because these are public lands that matter as much to folks in Chicago or New York or Texas or New Mexico or Washington as they do to you. And I know that's always a tension we grapple with here in BLM over just like how are impacts felt and how's management supposed to be. So we will be reporting essentially from the local perspective of like what we've learned by reaching out to folks here in Kingman in this public meeting. We've also held meetings, just so you know, with sovereign tribal nations. As part of our special government to government relationship with tribal nations, we held a meeting to learn a little bit more about specific concerns of the region's tribes. We held a more technically oriented meeting with other agencies, including other federal agencies like Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service, as well as local agencies, including the county and the city. Those meetings are very kind of technically oriented. We're about like who's got what data, things that we may need to kind of learn a little bit more about the project from a sort of technical or regulatory standpoint. And so that's why we kind of break that meeting off from the public meeting. And then there's a public meeting, which everyone's invited to. So there may be members of tribes here. There may be non-governmental groups. There may be economic development groups. There may be other special interest groups. And of course, individuals just representing themselves. And so that's the kind of story of where we're at. One last thing before we get into the meeting, and I know that's what everybody is here for, is just a kind of timeline of where we are at in things. We get pre-application meetings go on anytime somebody submits an application. These applicants that are presenting tonight have been working with BLM for over a year, I believe, as they kind of refined the pre-application process, getting us a concept that we felt was appropriate to actually go public with and get some feedback on. So that's what has been happening. Now we're in the solar variance process, this kind of research and due diligence. And we expect that sometime this summer, we'll be able to forward our report off to Washington for concurrence. And that will be weighed in by the BLM director, who either will grant concurrence and say, keep on looking at it, or say, not yet, go back and look at it some more. You know, that's what we're going to kind of be at. It's not a decision to authorize, and it's not a decision to deny per se. It's just kind of like another review. If we receive concurrence from the director, each project will be invited to begin their baseline research. And that is include intensive studies of wildlife and cultural resources out there. They will work on developing a true plan of development, not the preliminary one that we're looking at tonight, but one that really has the specifics that will tell us what kind of acreage they're looking at, what kind of technology they'll use, and how they'll actually design that project to minimize impacts to the resources of concern. And then we at BLM need to work on our permitting process, which is the NEPA planning process. And there's a lot of administrative work that we need to do to get that set up. So if these were to receive concurrence, we'd probably get started sometime in late summer 2023, and that goes on until it's done. We do not begin the NEPA process until we have a sufficient plan of development and sufficient baseline knowledge of how this might be, what resources may be impacted out there, and until we're ready here at BLM to begin it. Once we do start NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act analysis, these projects will be looking at most likely an environmental impact statement is where we're at right now. This is traditionally the hard look that is our permitting process. It will run anywhere from 18 to 24 months. I don't have a start date on that. There's the desired start dates of projects where they're kind of estimating things right now, but these are BLM decisions about when a project might start, if it makes it that far. I underlined a few things here to highlight public involvement opportunities here. When NEPA starts, if NEPA starts, there'll be a public scoping meeting. This is required by regulation, and this is a public meeting to actually talk more specifically about the project and alternatives, and again, go on the record in the formal permitting process about what issues need to be analyzed in that environmental impact statement. That's a TBD. I couldn't tell you when that could be. It could be months, it could be years away. You know, a lot depends on the steps before it. Once NEPA is underway, there'll be a draft analysis or a draft environmental impact statement, and that opens another round of public comment where the public is invited to, again, submit very specific comments to help us get it right, you know, to help us take that hard look. And that comes usually 6 to 9 months after that scoping period. And then ultimately, we work towards a final EIS and then a decision. And the decision is then at that point, the selection of an alternative to either authorize or not authorize the proposed project and what special conditions must be adhered to if they're authorized. It's hard to put a timeline on when those steps will happen because, like I said, we need to get through steps 2, 3, and 4 in front of us right now, and we're still in step 2. So I hope that clarifies for everyone here what the sort of stakes are for this meeting, that this is really kind of a research exercise and not a permitting process here. Our formal permitting process is a little bit farther down the line. And I do want to get into our presentation. So with that, I'm going to pivot to the presentations. If we have comments about this or questions about this, I'll be happy to take them up at the end. And just in case anybody missed what Selena was talking about, after each project, we'll try to confine some Q&A to about five or so minutes. And these are going to be really questions that you hope to get answers to right now, if we're able to answer them about, like, if you looked at this or this kind of impact. General comments of like, I'm for solar or I'm against solar, or this is my like general comment. We're going to try to hold those to the end because we want to make sure projects all get their opportunity to kind of present. But at that point, we will open up the floor to just general comments and questions, and we can revisit this process or however you would like to kind of participate at that point. So with that, I am going to shut my trap and turn it over to the presenters here. And our first presenter is going to be the Leo Solar Project. And I believe Rafik is going to do the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Rafik.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Rafik Albert, Executive Vice President for Lands and Permitting at Arevia Power. I'm joined today by Ricardo Groff, Managing Partner and Chief Development Officer at Arevia, and Chris Brooks, our Executive Vice President for External Affairs. Leo Solar is a 450 megawatt photovoltaic solar facility and 450 megawatt battery energy storage system. It's on 5,565 acres of BLM lands. It will have a 500 kilovolt generation tie line connecting to Mohave substation, existing substation in Clark County, Nevada. We're looking at multiple gen-tie route options. What all of the gen-ties have in common is that a large portion of the routing would be within an existing Section 368 energy corridor, which is designated by BLM as appropriate for future power line use. Project would generate enough electricity for 175,000 homes and would avoid 645,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide that would be generated if this were a fossil fuel burning plant. The project site is about 15 miles southeast of Bullhead City, 28 miles southwest of Kingman, and about 5 miles east of the Colorado River. The major components of the project would include the solar arrays, new access roads and improvements to existing access roads, underground electrical collector lines within the site, an on-site substation, an operations and maintenance facility, and the gen-tie line to Mohave substation. Site access would be most likely from the west using Willow Drive or Courtright Road. Project construction would take about 18 months. There would be an average of 350 to 700 construction workers on site. During certain peak periods, that could go up to 900 to 1,000 workers. Commercial operations are planned for end of 2027, and the project would have about a 30-year project lifespan. And as required by BLM, the project at the end of its life, at the end of its permitted lifespan, would be decommissioned and the facility is removed. Going into the initial resource findings, we've had biological studies conducted and identified various species, including desert tortoise, eagles, raptors, riparian birds, bats, that potentially occur in the project area. And that'll be analyzed in much greater detail as part of the NEPA analysis. Also related to cultural, tribal, and paleontological resources, we've conducted a Class 1 record search. There is a Class 3 pedestrian survey coming up this summer. And we are east of the Fort Mohave Reservation. We've already conducted a lot of outreach with the Fort Mohave tribe as well as other tribes in the area. And as surveying progresses, we expect a lot more coordination with the tribes as well as with BLM. Scenic and historic trails, there are none located within the site. Oakman Highway is about 1.5 miles to the east. Visual resources, the site is in Visual Resource Management Class 4. That is the lowest sensitivity class on BLM lands. Recreation, there's about 5.5 miles of off-highway vehicle trails on site. And that'll be addressed again in the NEPA study. And also we will be working with the local OHV organizations to make sure their needs are addressed. Wilderness areas, there are no designated wilderness areas on site. Water supply, solar plants generally don't require a lot of water during operations. And any water that is needed would be purchased from local water rights holders. Grazing and mining, we didn't find any conflicts with existing grazing allotments or mining claims that are present on site. As I've mentioned, there's going to be a number of studies completed as part of the NEPA analysis. These will include for biology, botanical surveys, desert tortoise surveys, eagle nesting surveys, avian use surveys, raptor migration surveys, and bat acoustic studies. And some of these will actually require 2 years worth of surveying. So we have 2 years worth of biological work, which has already been initiated. There will be cultural and paleontological surveys completed. There will be water resources studies. There will be visual resource studies, including visual simulations and glint and glare analysis. And there will be land use studies. And among those will be recreation analysis and the off-highway vehicle study. And then there will be reporting on air quality and greenhouse gas emissions, noise monitoring and assessment, traffic modeling, public health and safety, economics, socioeconomics, and environmental justice. And as Derek elaborated on a minute ago, we expect to have the updated variance factors analysis this summer, and then BLM will be deciding on whether to authorize the variance. And then that begins a much larger process of the NEPA analysis with the technical studies being completed. Those began in October of last year, and we expect them to continue until late 2024. And then the NEPA analysis would occur in the second half of this year and continue into 2025 with multiple opportunities for public and stakeholder input. And that is it for me. Thank you very much.
Rafiq, there was a question in the chat asking how many acres are being proposed for the solar?
So it's the application area is, I believe, 5,565. That's the exact number. But that is inclusive of lands. It's a larger area than will ultimately be needed. The practice that is followed with solar development is to analyze a site that's larger than you need. And so when the NEPA analysis identifies anything sensitive or that needs to be protected, you can shrink your project without causing any issues with loss of capacity for the plant itself. So it will be at most 5,500 acres.
Rafik, this is Derek. Could you scroll back to a map that you have? I think is helpful for folks to reference as they might be trying to visualize this a bit. Thanks.
This one?
Yeah, that's a good map there. It shows the land tenure out there. Thanks.
All
Okay, we have a
right.
question. We have a question from Wayne Hollins in the chat. And this is, will agrivoltaics be considered, or will this be installed as a monocrop? Is the ground under the panels going to be improved to have at least 5% organic matter to enable better water infiltration? And so I think Wayne is asking about, preservation of vegetation on site, and maybe some of the best practices of project design that you've looked at to ensure the least amount of soil and vegetation disturbance compatible with the project.
So the project site currently does not have any agriculture, and it is not our intention to introduce agriculture. We plan to retain the existing native vegetation. And the best practice that we see and that we actually implemented as a company in a prior project is to keep the vegetation in place during construction, and it is possible to preserve vegetation during construction and then allow it to regrow following completion of the work.
Thanks, Rafik.
And just a reminder, if anybody does want to come off mute and ask your question, just please feel free to raise your hand. And there was a question to show the other map. Was there another map in your?
See, is it this one?
That might be the one. A Towns, is that the one you were referring to? I think that might be the one. All right, we do have one hand raised. Matthew Hale. You want to go ahead and?
Yeah, am I unmuted?
You are, yes.
My question regarding the vegetation being left in place and vegetation regrowth, why has that not been the case on any other local solar projects that I've seen go up recently? There's been one on the I-40 near Yucca and one in Boulder City, and both of which look like they were a complete clear cut of the land and there's no vegetative regrowth underneath them at all. What makes what is different about is your project different than any of those projects? And why do I not see anything that I would call, vegetation left in place or regrowth on those? Thank you.
We actually have our a biologist on the line. Ryan Young, if you could speak to that and your experience with preserving vegetation on solar sites.
Yeah, this is Ryan Young. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, Matt, great question. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. We, with Arevia and the project that Rafik mentioned, Gemini Solar in Nevada, we're taking sort of out of the box innovative approaches to preserve habitat and allow for much needed solar development projects, and looking for ways where we can combine the two, where you actually contrary to what Derek mentioned before, that solar doesn't necessarily have to be a single use framework. And what we would like to do for potentially this project and what we have done in the past is combine some sort of conservation where we go in and do minimal disturbance instead of just the going with the bulldozer and grade the site and clear it and nuke it so there's nothing left. By going in and either mowing or just drive and crush method is another thing they call, where you leave the root mass in place. Not only do you preserve the habitat for the long term where it can regrow, it also minimizes dust and allows for other critters that may potentially live in the area to to find a bit of a refugia inside of the site. And if you want to look into it more, you can look at Gemini Solar. There's also some projects in the Central Valley of California that have done similar projects and had really good results with San Joaquin kit fox and kangaroo rats over there. So probably to see more of it in the future, Matt.
All right, there's another question in the chat from Travis. How much water will this specific project utilize over a 30-year project life cycle? Have you reviewed the Bureau of Reclamation's SEIS for Lower Colorado River operations? Have you spoken to Mohave County Water Authority to review water allocations available if the SEIS cuts local river water supplies?
So as a preliminary estimate, we expect the water use during operations would be about 10 acre-feet per year, which is approximately equal to 30 homes. So it's not a very substantial water use. It's certainly a lot less than agriculture. As for the contacts with those agencies, that'll definitely, I think, occur during the NEPA process when the water resources studies are prepared, but they haven't occurred yet.
All right, great questions, everyone. We have any other specific questions for Rafiq right now? This is not your last chance. If you're still trying to think of one, you can keep on thinking and put it in the chat and we might be able to answer it there, or we can come back to it later on. But if I don't see any hands up here in the next few seconds, we are going to move on to our next presentation in Mineral Park. All right, seeing none at this time, we will move ahead to Mineral Park. Thank you, Rafiq. Thank you, Revia team.
I'm
Oh.
sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we do.
Sorry, I pushed the button to speak, but it was still muted. So
Oh,
I have,
that's okay.
this is Mike Ganuscio. I have two questions. So first question is on the water allocation. Who's giving the water up?
We have not gotten to that point yet. We will be examining that as part of the NEPA process, and as we get closer to that stage, we will be talking to various water rights owners to see what's available.
I see. Okay. The other question I have is on those panels, and I don't have an exact, we'll just call it a shelf life on the panels, but at the end of the life of the panels, who's responsible and what are you guys going to do with them?
Are you referring to disposal of the panels at the end of their life?
Yes.
There is a decommissioning plan that is required by BLM, and it identifies the appropriate disposal. I believe in most cases, solar panels nowadays are being recycled. That wasn't always the case in the past, but they recognize the value of the panels now, and they're being recycled to the degree possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the questions, Mike. All right, so is the Reenergy team ready? I will turn it over to Dylan or Leslie to start with Mineral Park. And Reenergy is actually going to be presenting on two of their proposals, both of them along US 93 north of Kingman. We're going to start with Mineral Park and talk about that project a bit, and then we'll talk about the White Hills proposal after that, which is farther up north near the wind facility. So with that, Dylan, Leslie, Reenergy team, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Derek. Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Farmer. I'm the head of permitting and environmental at Reenergy Partners. Just wanted to start by saying thank you for taking the time. I know everyone has extremely busy schedules in life, especially on a weeknight. Just appreciate you all being here and providing feedback and questions and concerns. I do want to just give a quick introduction. My colleague, Antonio Giustino, he is our Chief Operations Officer. He is also on the phone to answer any questions that come up. And Derek also mentioned Dylan. George Sills is with Logan Simpson. There are expert consultant. They've had over 30 years of biological, cultural, environmental experience and have done a lot of projects that have gone through NEPA. So they have a lot of experience in that realm. Logan, and I should mention Logan Simpson Dylan will take over the presentation. I'll introduce some of the key aspects of the project, and then Dylan will go through more of the details of the resources that he's looked into. So I'll start with who Energy Partners is. We're a utility scale renewable energy company. We focus on solar at a utility level as well as battery energy storage projects. Our current portfolio consists of roughly 30 late stage projects. Dylan, if you could go to the next, there you go. Our portfolio consists of roughly 30 late stage projects. That's a combination of solar and storage. The top map you can see there is our solar facilities that we're developing, pretty much scattered across the US. And the bottom map shows our battery storage. A lot of them are co-located with solar. However, we are also developing projects that are just standalone storage. It depends on what the utility and what the grid really needs in the area of the US. I will say one of our pillars that was defined on the first page, sorry, I'm going back and forth here, is meeting the unique needs of local communities. The leadership at Reenergy has participated in a lot of different community outreach initiatives in the past, some of which are 4-H clubs, being involved in those, or sponsoring county fairs. I've been involved in STEM programs at schools to help educate the youth on potential future career paths in energy. We've worked with training first responders and providing equipment and resources. So we understand that each community is unique and has unique needs, and we recognize that and encourage it. So we'd be happy to have conversations with any community groups that are here today. We would be open and willing to talk with landowners, concerned stakeholders, anyone in the area that may have concerns or questions. You can do that here, or my contact information I think is on the last slide of this presentation, as well as some other members of my team. So multiple avenues for that. Okay, Dylan, you could go to the project. So I'm going to introduce Mineral Park as well as White Hills. But after I introduce Mineral Park, Dylan will take over. So Mineral Park is an approximately 4,000 acre proposed solar facility in Mohave County. We are hoping to have up to 275 megawatts of PV solar generation, along with 165 megawatts of battery storage at this facility. 275 megawatts, to give you something to compare it to, can roughly power about 41,000 homes in the area. The energy generated from this facility, if approved, would be delivered to Unisource Energy Services transmission grid. You can see on the map here, the left side, the planned Mineral Park substation is this yellow dot. There's a current substation, but Unisource plans to upgrade it. So once that is done, the project would connect via a Gentie line from the project into that substation, and a transmission line runs along the road there. It's located approximately 7 miles northwest of Kingman, directly off of Highway 93 on BLM administered lands. It's located in a variance area, like Derek explained at the beginning of the call. Also, portions of it are in Arita, which he also explained a little bit at the beginning, and adjacent to a utility corridor that's already been designated by BLM. The list of project facilities is similar to Leo Solar. A lot of solar facilities these days have the same equipment. So I'll kind of focus in on this map here. This is just to give you an idea of what the project could look like. This is incredibly high level and preliminary. since, like Derek mentioned, we have a long way to go if we are able to move forward through NEPA. So we would do all of the environmental studies, land use studies that would go into the NEPA process. So you can just see here that the project has the PV solar panels. They're on the horizontal tracking system that follows the sun. So think of a sunflower and how they move through the day. It's very similar to that. The collection system that would be buried, inverters, transformers, a project substation, and the battery storage system component. Gen tie lines, which I mentioned, would be hopefully we wouldn't need more than 300 feet is what we're estimating right now to go from a project substation within the project over to this Mineral Park substation with that, where that yellow dot is. We would have some temporary equipment in laydown areas during construction that would be areas for construction workers to park. We would have a staging area for equipment, things like that, but those would be restored after the construction ends. And I guess lastly, the entire project would have perimeter fencing. That's a federal regulatory requirement. So each kind of chunk or section of panels would have that around them. Okay, so I will hand it over to Dylan to talk about preliminary resource considerations for Mineral Park.
Good evening. My name is Diane Simpson-Colbank, and I'm going to be making the presentation tonight. So sorry to pull one on you, Leslie, but Dylan is here and he is changing the slide. So first off, wanted just to kind of reiterate some of the things that Derek has said, which is that we're not in NEPA. We're doing what we call preliminary planning. So all of the information that we have on any kind of potential environmental consideration is based on literature searches, desktop studies, and some preliminary reconnaissance level work. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about is what we are looking at this time and some of the things that we are finding out about the area. One of the things that I think people are well aware of is that this part of the state is rich in biological and cultural resources. In this area, specifically for the Mineral Park site, there are no federally listed species or candidate species at this point. And we have no designated critical habitats. So at this point, we're not looking at any potential effect to anything that's been federally listed. There are no wildlife corridors, movement corridors. The Arizona Game and Fish Department have done quite a bit of work in identifying where these movement corridors are within the state. And this area that we're looking at for the Mineral Park solar facility is not in one of those corridors. There are a lot of wildlife species out there that we are going to look at pretty closely, and they consist of some of the Bureau of Land Management, BLM sensitive species, which also include some of the state sensitive species. As you can see here is a photo of a tortoise, and that's one of the species that we'll look at. Golden eagle, Gila monster, rosy boa, and the burying owl. So one of the things that we're going to consider as we get through this process, and if the variance is authorized before we get into NEPA, is look at things like the Migratory Bird Act, Treaty Act, and also the Bald and Golden Protection Act. So those are other regulations, policies, and procedures in consideration that we'll be looking at when we look at the wildlife in the area. Right now, we are not in that approval stage, but once we get through the variance, then we'll have a lot of discussions with not only Arizona Game and Fish Department, but also U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And in those discussions, we'll determine if we need any further specific on-the-ground pedestrian studies for any of these wildlife species. So, cultural resources. At this time, we have only conducted what we call a Class 1 cultural resource literature survey. And what that means is that we've taken the area itself and looked a mile around the area to look at what other cultural resource surveys, pedestrian surveys have been done. And as well on the site itself. And what we found is that only 12% of the project area has been surveyed, but less than 1% is really done to current standards. So what that means is when we get to that point, if we get to that point, we would go out and do pedestrian intensive surveys for the entire area. So one of the things I thought we would like to share with everybody is that from the information that we got from the literature, there were 3 previously recorded cultural sites. And these are identified here, and they're basically trails or roads. A couple of them are considered eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. And one of the things that we'll be doing is looking at these, re-identifying them and making sure that we understand what the character of the site is once we get to that stage and if the variance is approved. So part of this process is also the coordination with the tribes, and that's something that the BLM will take the lead on, and we will support them in the consultation and coordination with the tribes as well as the State Historic Preservation Office. Some of the other things that we have heard is of concern is the recreation opportunities that are provided out there. While there aren't any designated facilities like campgrounds out in this particular area, we do know that the area is used for OHVs and hunting, and as well, a lot of dispersed activities that go on. The Kingman Field Office has a draft travel management plan that has not been accepted or approved or in final form at this point in time. But of what's in the plan now is that there are about 17.8 routes, and you can see them on this graphic here. The black lines are part of what would remain open if the travel management plan is approved. But we also know that if, as we go forward and evaluate this more closely, that we would have to look at what would be alternate routes around the site if any of the open trails are truncated because of the facility. One of the other things that we've looked at is what are the grazing allotments here, and there are 3 in this mineral park project area that would be affected by the project if it goes forward. 2 of them, Castle Rock and Mineral Park, have fairly small percentage that would be affected, and then Pine Springs would have about 46% of the allotment would be affected by this facility. So again, if the variance is approved, BLM will initiate the process in working with the lottees and going through that process as well. So it's something that we are aware of, and we'll be working very closely with the BLM to further investigate this component. Visual analysis is something that we will do and do a fairly comprehensive study on. This area is identified as a VRM class 4, which means that it allows for a major modification to the landscape character. And what that means is while a solar project is meeting this objective by the BLM VRM classes, it doesn't mean that we can go out and just create additional discordant features or create additional contrast. That's not necessary. We always try to look for those features, practices that we can implement to reduce any of the contrast that may be created, whether it's through vegetation, contouring, rock staining, things like that. Part of what we'll be doing if the variance process is approved in our NEPA analysis for visual resource is that we will look at the effect to night sky, to glare studies, and also identify any what we call sensitive viewing platforms or key observation points. In this case, one of the things that we'll be looking at, or one of the locations, is what is visible from US 93. And if there are other places that people feel that are very important, then we will be looking at doing part of the process, which is the visual resource contrast rating system, and which will include photorealistic simulations. So the next item that we do want to talk about is a little bit of the water consumption. I know this is in preliminary form. We're just starting the process, and Leslie and her team are just starting the design and getting into the details, but we're looking at potentially up to 200 acre-feet of water during the construction period, and then thereafter about 2 acre-feet for operation and maintenance activities. The source is currently undetermined, but will be identified as the design moves forward if it does move forward. We do have a preliminary schedule, and as Derek said, you know, there are no absolute timelines here. But if we move forward, the technical resource studies would be done over a period of 4 to 6 months. Then we would start NEPA, getting into the scoping process and developing the document for review, with a construction tentatively scheduled maybe out in the 2027, and then the commercial operation date around the end of 2027. So I'll turn it back over to Leslie and or Derek for any questions that anybody might have.
Great, Diane. Thank you for that. That was wonderful. And we are going to open it up for some questions about the Mineral Park proposal that we just heard from. So let's go ahead and you can raise your hand or put a question over in the chat that we can recite, or that's the best way to do it. So
Matthew has his hand up, but Matthew, before you go, there is one question that Peter put in the chat earlier, and it is, why not put solar along I-40 where there's a lot of space and few people live, and not along Golden Valley where it is still a growing residential area?
yeah, you know, Peter, I will take that question here first, and perhaps Re-Energy can follow up with a little bit more perspective on their siting decisions. From a BLM perspective, we're a responsive agency, so we don't solicit applications for renewable energy. We don't really look to promote renewable energy in any given space. We are here to receive applications and process them as they come in. And of course, you know, I think that there's a lot of questions about, well, why here and why not there? And there's so much open space, why not over, you know, over there? Some of the logic I know is that applications follow transmission and interconnect potential. And, you know, where there are substations where the interconnection happens, those are always going to be the most attractive areas for any power plant production, renewable energy or otherwise. And it is a long, hard journey to get transmission coordinated because of the way that those lines cross so many different jurisdictions. So where there is infrastructure, applications tend to follow that, and that's at least where we've seen our attention most focused, is responding to applications in that area. Re-Energy, do you perhaps have some, might want to color that in a bit about how you've, your site selection kind of logic plays out?
Sure. I mean, I think you answered it really well. That is how we look at things. We look at areas which are closer to substations and transmission lines, so there's less impact on the surrounding area. The further away from a transmission line you go, the more gen-tie line you have to get to that transmission line. So that is, I would say that's the primary reason, but there's a lot of other factors too, such as land availability. If you want to look at private land, those landowners have to be willing and want to sign leases with you. There's environmental considerations. There's a lot of things that go into the development of a new renewable energy project.
All right.
Hopefully that helps you out a bit, Peter. Oh yeah. All right. So go ahead, Selena. I think you identified Matthew as the next one up.
Yeah, Matt had his hand up next. So go ahead, Matthew, sorry.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. The first being addressing rainwater runoff and the alterations to you know, those natural systems and rainwater in this area. The local community just to the southwest of the proposed site is Golden Valley, which is semi-rural, and it's mostly dirt roads and lots of wash crossings and such like that. We already have major problems with you know, seasonal thunderstorms causing swiftwater rescues for search and rescue. People can't get home and all kinds of things. The valley's already plagued with rainwater runoff problems, and what is NRG's solution to mitigate that if you're going to be removing, natural vegetation and possibly changing how water runoff is flows and is distributed in that area? That's all upstream of the nearest community of Golden Valley.
Hey, Matthew, this is Tony Justino, CEO of Reenergy. I'll take the first stab, Leslie, if you don't mind, and I apologize for the background noise. First off, we don't like taking, top vegetation, as you were saying. In fact, here there really isn't any where our projects are, at least very little, but where there is, our intent is not to remove it. Now, specifically to what we call hydrological flows, in any development that we do, any project that we do, we must, and this is per any regulation worth its salt, and certainly per the financeability of the project, we must, first we do a very detailed aerial survey within 1 foot resolution to find out exactly the topology of the site. Then we run hydrological modeling with that very high detail resolution. We must improve or at least leave the same all water coming into our development versus what is leaving our development pre-development. We must either leave it the same or improve it. So we would never be able to get away with, and this per regulation, developing something that would leave runoff that is worse than it was prior. Now, there has been a lot of, when you mentioned residences and such, the hodgepodge, residential real estate market doesn't always do that. But what we're talking about here, utility scale, renewable development, we must. So the proper drainages will be engineered on the site. Water will be collected. All this is like standard practice in our industry, and you would not see any detrimental downflow impacts from our farm. One note that was asked before about water usage, and I saw another comment as well. I just wanted to point out the average water usage for agriculture in Arizona is 4.7 acre feet per acre. Okay, that's national average is somewhere around 2.7, but that's the order of magnitude per acre. We use about that much for the entire.
Oh, you're cutting out there a little bit, Mr.
We would use,
Custodian.
apologize. We'd use for the entire year. I'm sorry if my connection is unstable. Could you hear me?
I cut out a little bit there.
I think we heard what you said, Tony. Thank you.
I do have another question if one of you guys wants to address it before I give the microphone back over, if that's all right.
Yeah, we do have a few other questions. So if we can make it real quick, Matthew,
I'll be
that'd
quick. This is related to earlier. Mr. Rafik Albert said that the proposed solar field down there in Mohave Valley would be a multi-use or managed with a multi-use intent, and that the vegetation would be left in place. Is that the case in the Mineral Park proposed solar development?
I can take that.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Leslie. Go ahead.
So, yes, it's the same case. So we strive to remove as little vegetation as possible during construction, and those areas that are temporary, so not where the piles, where the solar panels will go, we'll revegetate that. And that is actually federal regulation. It's a stormwater plan. And so what we are hoping to do is also create some sort of positive environment there. So by planting pollinators or looking into agrivoltaics, whatever it may be, we're definitely open and looking into all of those options. It will not just be clear cut, fully graded. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I would raise a concern that I raised earlier, was that the solar plants that I've seen go up in recent history, that has not been the case. It looks like a clear-cut dead desert underneath solar panels. And that is one of my largest concerns with this, is that we're just going to have this big, ugly, empty desert with a big, ugly, empty lot with solar panels on top of it, and completely lose all the environment that's underneath and has been there for longer than all of us have.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that concern, Matthew. I hope you can hear me now. The new trackers that the industry is seeing, not only they follow terrain much better. They're able to take much more slope, and so this cut and fill that you're mentioning, this grading that occurs, is not needed as much with the newer technology. I will tell you that it is our intent to use the latest technology and minimize as much as possible any grading or cut and fill needed. And I really do, I relate to your concerns, because I've seen that as well. And I think half the time that I see it, it's not needed even. It's just because EPC contractors are used to doing it that way, and they do it that way. But ultimately, it's not really needed on fairly flat land. And what we're talking about here, we've already looked at the land. It's not, topologically, it's not very difficult. And we think it's well within the bounds of the new technology that you just need to drive posts and not have to, grade unnecessarily. So I definitely sympathize with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I know there's lots of activity in the chat, but before we move over to the chat, I had noticed a hand up earlier. I think that was Travis Bowling. And I just wanted to circle back and make sure, I don't know if maybe your question got answered, or if you still have a question, please feel free to come off mute.
I still have questions.
Okay. Go ahead, you can ask your question.
Okay, well, for one thing, I been taking care of the water out there on that allotment for about 7 years. And I know about all the wildlife out there. There's a lot of deer, javelina, there's tortoises, there's you name it. I mean, it's all out there. Gila monsters, golden eagles. There's 2 sets of golden eagles out there. I seen one of them today. And my question is there's already 5 water stations and a water line developed through that allotment for the wildlife and the cattle. What's going to happen to all that? And another question I had was the same as the gentleman before me, on the elevation and the drainage of that. That whole allotment is one big drainage after another. And I've been out there at the ranch when it's rained up to 3.5 inches within a 45-minute period, where the water had washed down and went over the top of 93 and come all the way down in Golden Valley and washed property down. No man's property over on Colorado and Agua Fria, washed some of his property away in that storm. There's elevation drop from the west to the east side of their proposal is 150 foot of elevation. I was just wondering how they're going to control flash floods when you strip all that vegetation. And I've seen the water just do some really tremendous things out there during storms. I just wonder what they're going to do about flooding. And then another thing too, on the ground clear, do they use ground clear to keep vegetation from coming back?
Travis, is that all of your questions?
Yeah, for now.
Okay. I'll answer let's see if I can remember them in order. The first one, the environmental, about all of the species out there. So, and Logan Simpson, please feel free to jump in as well. That's the whole point of the next step, if we do get approval to move forward, is to understand those species, understand any potential habitat that's out there, and make sure that we avoid and or mitigate as much as possible. One thing you mentioned, larger animals like javelina and deer. The way that we're designing solar panels and how they're placed today, they're fenced in individual groupings. So that gives basically a corridor, sometimes called a migration corridor. If there's a lot of deer running through there, I'm not sure because we haven't had the ability to do the studies yet, but we leave corridors, and then there's ways for smaller animals like tortoises to still travel through the solar facility based on the fencing. So there's ways to still accommodate and have species still thrive. And there's actually been studies shown that species are increased because of solar facilities, because it's protected. We're growing the natural vegetation that's been there and providing that habitat. I guess before I go on, Logan Simpson, is there anything you think we should add?
No, I think you covered it well, Leslie. These are all, really good questions and things that we don't have the answers for at this point in time, but there are certainly items that we will take very close look at. And if we get to that point in the process of doing our NEPA analysis, looking at a biological evaluation and getting the biologists on the ground to make sure that we totally understand what the habitat values are, and being able to design with the keeping as much of the habitat intact and allowing for the species to continue to do what they need to do and want to do, be very cognizant of breeding time and nesting time. And I think working very closely with Leslie and her design team is making sure that we have a very sensitive project that's out there on the land.
Thanks, Diane. I think your other question was related to concerns on flooding. Part of the stormwater plan is, and other regulations say that we can't change the grading so that water sheds off site. So there are a lot of engineering designs that go into a solar facility, and they address that. So there's hydrology studies, and there's they use that information to design the plant. And if needed, there's even water retention ponds at some facilities, depending on the watershed, the rainfall, and all of that. So that's something that we would look into in the next step if we're able to move forward.
Have you ever been out there to look at that area? Have you drove through there to see what you're really going to build them solar panels on?
Yes.
Because it's not a really suited place to build solar panels. It really isn't. There's too many ravines, washes. I mean, it's just in the elevation drop it would be, to me, it would be not cost efficient to do all the dirt work you're going to have to do to control flooding in that much of an elevation drop within 2 miles. That's 150 feet of elevation drop within 2 miles of from the east to the west side of your proposal. So I don't know how you're going to figure you're going to engineer that.
There's a lot of solar facilities are built on varying elevation, so it's possible to have that without having to grade a whole site. It doesn't need to be completely flat. Although this site is relatively flat for the most part. I know you're saying 150 feet over 2 miles, but in terms of a solar facility, that's very manageable. So again, we would make sure that all of our engineering is correct and adequate, and we do the hydrology study so that we can ensure that we're not creating any additional runoff or changing the water courses.
Okay, I got one other question. If you guys put that in, and then it does, and you can't control the flooding, and it floods people out down here in the valley, who's going to be responsible?
That's a very good question. First of all, this wouldn't happen. This is on BLM land. We have to go through a rigorous process, even if we get to the next step, right? So right now we're just in the very beginning. We still
Yes,
have
ma'am.
to go through NEPA. There will be a whole list of requirements during that process that will be evaluated so that that doesn't happen. So even not that we would ever want that to happen, but even if for some reason we weren't responsible, there's just no way that we would get that far for it to lead to that point.
This is Derek from BLM, and Travis, it's a great question, and it's a question that I don't have an answer to. I think what Leslie's trying to explain is, these projects have to be engineered to a standard that peer engineers review and consider to be sufficient for runoff events. As we know, it's oftentimes hard to predict the future. And I can't think of a situation that comes to my mind where, at least in my experience, where BLM has encountered a situation where engineering on BLM lands failed to the point where others were impacted off BLM lands. And I think at that point it becomes a case for the courts, and it's not very clear. And our standard policy of like who's responsible for what, it's something that ultimately would be adjudicated through insurance companies and lawyers and all that stuff. But it's an important question, and one that we really strive to seek to avoid a situation by requiring a high standard of civil engineering that goes into it. But duly noted, Travis. And I know that we have,
I made a trip over to Las Vegas to take my wife to the airport, and I've seen a lot of land out on between here and 93. I'm not against solar. Don't get me wrong. You can put them. I'm against where you're going to put this one, and a lot of people think I'm just doing against it for the ranch sake. It's not. It's for the wildlife. I'm more protective for the wildlife and the habitat than the ranch sake. But this area out here really needs to be investigated really good, because I'm serious. It's not a good place to put a solar site. It really isn't.
Thank you, Travis. We do appreciate your comments and your questions. We do have a couple more hands and still one more presentation to get to. So let me go ahead and get to the next hands that are raised. Wayne, you are next. Let me see if I could take you off mute. I'm not sure.
There I go. Am I
Oh,
unmuted now?
Yeah, yes, you are.
Okay, my concern is the water, and just listening, it sounds like we're doing the standard thing. We're gonna guide the water to run through the property. And I understand we're not going to increase the amount that's running through there, but that we slow it down. And the problem is we're going to open that land up, and that's a number one opportunity to improve the soil. So instead of having to put washes and stuff through there, if we improve the soil, we won't have the water running off to fill up the washes and stuff. And everybody seems to ignore the fact that our desert soil has very little organic matter, so not much water can actually soak into it and infiltrate and even help to recharge the aquifer. So every percent of organic matter that is put into the soil, that allows 20,000 gallons of water per acre to soak in. That's not going to run off. So 5% seems to be what the composting councils suggest for most property, which would be 100,000 gallons more that could infiltrate into the ground and not have to be running off and causing extensive flooding down there where we're washing cars off the road and killing people in the washes. And nobody is working with the watershed from as high as they can go, and most of that BLM land up there to slow it down. So when it gets down to where you're going to put your site, it's not already going 30 miles an hour. So you slow it down on the way up there, you improve the soil, because if you don't improve the soil and you slow the water down, it still can't get into the ground because there's nothing for it to absorb it. So it seems counterintuitive to not improve the soil so that water, like say, 4,000 acres, you get an inch of rain, that's 333 acre feet of water. And what's it gonna do? It's gonna wash down there, fill up the washes and keep on going out just like it is now. So if we're
Thank
going to
you.
do these projects, that would be the prime time to fix the problem. So
Thank you, Wayne.
that's my comment. Thank you.
We appreciate your comment and we definitely have it on the record. Thank you. We are running really short on time, and all hands seem to be down. So I think we better move on to the next presentation.
If I could.
Long-winded.
All right, do we have our next presenter ready to go?
Yes, Lena, it's me again, Leslie.
Okay. All right, Leslie, just wanted to make sure.
Okay, so getting into White Hills, it's similar to Mineral Park as far as all of the details and resource concerns go, but there's a few differences. So it's a little bit larger than Mineral Park at 4,300 acres of proposed land, again, all on BLM administered lands. We are proposing 450 megawatts, and that's both the PV as well as 450 megawatts of BESS. This project would connect to an existing White Hills substation. It's shown in the black star on the left map on the screen. And there is an existing transmission line, which is shown in a pink line. This line in the substation is owned by WAPA, Western Area Power Administration. The project's located actually a lot further north than Mineral Park, 40 miles northwest of Kingman, as compared to 7 with Mineral Park. It's also really close to Highway 93, just east of it on, like I said, BLM administered lands. It's in the Variance area, it's in Arita, and it's along the WAPA Peacock to Meade 345 kV line. As with Mineral Park, it has the same facilities. So instead of going through those again, I can explain what all of these lines on the map mean, as the Gentai route is a little bit more complex than that at Mineral Park. So we have 2 sections of solar facility. Again, this is really preliminary and high level and very subject to change. They will change the layout of these panels. So right now we're looking at the southern portion of the panels, that basically just a rectangle at the bottom of the map. Our primary Gentai route is the red dashed line. So we would go east and then north to connect back to the northernmost facility. And that's because there is an existing wind facility in between those 2 pieces of land. That's owned by a different company, although we have spoken to them about the project. So we plan to go around their turbines and then north and up to the White Hills substation. We have an alternate line in the dashed green that is just a longer route that is less efficient, but if for some reason there's a resource concern or other concern, we will look at that route. I think that is all I wanted to explain on this map. Okay, so back to Diane for the preliminary resource considerations.
Hi. So we're in the same physiographic region. So a lot of the species that we will be looking at from Mineral Park are along the corridor, 95 corridor in the White Hills as well. Again, there's no federally listed or designated critical habitat for the White Hills site, and there are no designated wildlife movement corridor. Doesn't mean that the wildlife doesn't move. It's not one of the designated corridors from Arizona Game and Fish. So there are also some of the same sensitive species, both BLM and state sensitive species that we will be looking at. This happens to be a photo of one of the young Western burrowing owls. And again, because of the eagles and migratory birds, we'll be looking at that component to the evaluation in the detailed analysis that we'll hopefully be getting into if the variance process is approved. Again, level of coordination with the BLM biologists as well as Game and Fish and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So next one. Cultural resource, again, we did a class 1 a mile away buffer around the site and found that about 15% of this project area has been surveyed, but again, not to the current standards. So we'll have to go out and do a cultural class 3 cultural resource survey if we move forward into NEPA. There were 4 previously recorded cultural sites. Again, these are roads, 4 roads. One of them is recommended eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Again, as with the other projects, we will do our support of BLM in their outreach to the tribal communities and as well as to the State Historic Preservation Office and make sure that that's part of an early going process if and when we get into the NEPA process. Recreation is, again, there are no designated facilities, but again, OHV, hunting, dispersed activities. The Kingman draft travel management plan identified about 9.8 miles of route that would remain open if the travel management plan is approved. Grazing is just 2 allotments, 2% of the Big Ranch Unit A and less than 1% of Unit B. Again, the impact to these allotments will be part of what we are doing and working very closely with the BLM if this project moves forward and the variance process is approved. So I'm sure for those of you in this area that the visual character, the landscape character has been noticeably altered with the presence of the turbine and the wind farm. And so you're very sensitive to the visual setting out there. Again, we're in a visual resource management class 4, which allows for major modifications, but we do want to take a very careful evaluation of how a solar facility would add to the landscape character and what the difference would be created by the solar facility. So again, we'll be doing very detailed comprehensive analysis on the impacts to the visual resources that are out there, from sensitive viewing platforms, from making sure we're doing gluten glare studies and using photorealistic simulations to help everybody understand what this project would look like if it moves forward. So mitigation measures in terms of visual are things that we're going to take a very careful look at and make sure that anything this project contributes to any sort of contrast in the landscape is something that we will identify and have as part of the NEPA document. Water use has again been identified about 200 acre feet during the construction period, the 12-month or year-long construction period, and that the water source has not yet been identified. Similar set schedule to Mineral Park. Won't take the time because we talked about it before, but this is a very flexible and flex schedule. And as we go through the process, it will be revised. And this is something that we want to make sure that we communicate to the community as we move forward. If the project is approved, what the schedule is, when these public outreach meetings are going to be held, both during scoping and during the draft comment period. Again, the actual length is still in flux. And if everything were to go as per this schedule, the commercial operation date is sometime at the end of 2027.
All right, so we are actually out of time, but I think if some people want to hang in there, we might be able to spend a few more minutes. I don't see any hands up right now. And I have been monitoring the chat. I do see mostly some comments, concerns being posted, which is great. We are, of course, going to take all of those comments into consideration, and they will be on the record. But okay, I see one hand, Amelia. I hope I pronounced your name right. Amelia, maybe?
Hi, yeah,
hi.
it's Amalia. Would this be the time for general comment on all projects?
Yeah, this is, I think, a good time for that. Go ahead and ask your question, please.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. I actually just have a comment. My name is Amalia Boli Fuentes, and I'm an attorney with the law firm Lozo Drury. And I just wanted to comment tonight on behalf of Laborers International Union of North America, Local 1184, also known as LIUNA. After reviewing the variance factor analyses and hearing the presentations for the proposed projects, LIUNA has no objection to the BLM proceeding to continue reviewing projects, but does feel strongly that full NEPA review through an environmental impact statement will be necessary to assess potential environmental impacts from these projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, the next hand up is Matthew Hale.
Selena, if I could, Matthew, if you could just hang on just a second. Selena, before we move along, I wanted to point out a number of comments and questions in the chat. All the comments are part of the record, and there's been a lot of questions in the chat concerning process, and I've been diligently watching them and trying to respond to folks directly, or generally if it was more directed towards a broader audience. So there's been some questions about grazing, some questions about reclamation bonding, and some other things. And if you're interested in those things, by all means, scroll back up. And if you ask those questions, you may have to kind of scroll back up through the chat to see my response, but we are watching that and responding. So thanks again. If you have any other questions that you want to put in the chat, I will be working on answering those while we listen to Matthew up next. So I'll turn it back over to Matthew. Thanks for waiting, Matthew.
Thank you. Just a question. What is are any of your are any of these projects at a point where you know what kind of impact using American resources rather than imported resources will have on the project? How much American resources are you going to imported or have you? Thank you.
Matthew, I'm sorry, your audio was kind of breaking in and out a little bit. And then I see you went on mute. So
I'm sorry, let me try again. Can you hear me now?
yeah, we caught some of what you had asked earlier, but your audio is going in and out.
The crux of my question is how much American materials are we going to be using on these projects, and are we even at the point where these companies have considered that? Do we know the answer to that question? And if we do, what is it? That's all.
I'll kick it off, Matt, and then I'm going to give it to Leslie and to Rafiq for maybe a really quick response on that. I think that generally procurement of materials, and that would be steel and the panels, are something that's a kind of a late project decision when they actually get into the procurement there. I can speak broadly about Department of Interior policy. So in the recent I can't remember if it was the Infrastructure Act or Inflation Reduction Act, but the two big bills that cleared Congress and the president earlier, I guess it's been last year, have incentives for Buy American, which would mean rent incentives on public land for projects that procure American-built panels and American steel. And so those are things that are hanging out there for the projects to utilize if they get to a development stage. But Rafiq, Leslie, do you guys have any kind of procurement insights on how you look at Buy American or American Resources that you can offer, Matt?
I'm going to have Chris Brooks from our team respond to that.
Thank you, Rafiq. And I think Derek really hit on the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill and their incentives within those two bills to provide financial incentives for American-made products. And additionally, Arevia Power, due to our funding in part coming from organized labor, has a responsible contractor policy in place that incentivizes us to do the same.
Thanks, Chris. Great answer. Re-Energy, any thoughts on that?
Here we go. I think you both nailed it on the head. I really don't have anything else to add. That does come later in the process. We of course would love to use first solar panels, which are made in the US, and look at other materials as well. That will come later with our EPC contractor. Sorry, acting up.
All right. I believe, let's see, we have one more hand up. That is Art. Art, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, I would like to.
All right, we can hear you.
Okay. I've been listening to this proposal and I'm really confused. As I posted in the chat, the Boulder City array in 2 months, May and June, used 22 million gallons of water for dust control. I do not see how this proposal, you're saying less than an acre foot, 320,000 gallons, 326,000 gallons in 1 year to keep dust and to manage this facility that's 4 times the other size. I'm very confused by that. And it seems that what Travis was talking about earlier is very true. A lot of people have not really witnessed when these washes run. That water that comes down, it doesn't stop for no man anywhere. I really feel that BLM should be the stewards of the land. They should be protecting the land from this type of a blight. This is where you're taking the public lands, the only thing that people truly own, and turning them into something that you want to make profit on. I think it's wrong, totally wrong. And I just feel that in the long run, if Mohave County allows this to happen, they will regret it. That's my piece. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comment. And I don't see any more hands in the chat, and we have gone over on time, but please don't think that this is your last opportunity to have your voice heard or your questions answered. Feel free to send in any questions, comments, and yeah, we thank everyone for calling in tonight. Thank you for your participation, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks all. This is Derek, and I will hang around the chat another minute or two. I see a lot of people have been dropping off the call, but if you do have any comments that you want to put in the chat, we'll end the presentations and release folks if they want to go. But if you have any other questions that you want to put in the chat, I will do my best to get through those in the next few minutes before we lose the Zoom feed. So if you can squeeze something in, go for it. If not, we'll be checking our inboxes and our mailboxes, and please get your comments and questions into us, and stay tuned for more news on this. Thank you very much, everyone.
Hey, this is Jean Bishop. I just wanted to say thank you for all your patience and stuck through the whole thing, listened to all the comments, and we'll see where this takes us. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.